We begin with the race to replace Justin Trudeau. 7 contenders registered last week to run in the Liberal leadership campaign. 6 are left standing. And the window just closed to sign up new Liberal members to vote for them. Catherine Cullen is the host of the CBC podcast, The House. Okay, Catherine, the race is starting to firm up and take some shape. Where do things stand? Walk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, we know now who the list of candidates is going to be, and then there were 6, David. As many candidates as we have weeks left in this race. So let's go through the names. Mark Carney, been hearing a lot about him lately. Chrystia, Freeland, of course, the former finance minister. Karina, Gould, former Liberal House leader. Jaime Batiste, the Nova Scotia Liberal MP. Frank Baylis, former Quebec Liberal MP. And Ruby Dalla, former Ontario Liberal MP, all making the cut, sort of past this first line, approval from the party to jump into the race. There is one name missing from this race. Folks will have heard over the weekend, Chandra Arya, the current Ontario Liberal MP, Ottawa area MP, not approved. Now, we should say this is by no means the end of the line. There's still money that the candidates have to raise, a grand total of $350,000 paid in increments by February 17th. Also important today, David, it's the deadline for signing up new members. That is a big deal because you want to bring folks in from your own campaign. You know you have them as supporters. It's not just about converting existing Liberal Party members. Our understanding is just south of about 100,000 Liberal members going into this race. Talked to a couple of the camps today. They do feel like that number is going to go up a lot. We're talking upwards of 200,000. We're waiting to see the final number, of course, from the Liberal Party. People may have also seen online there are some folks talking about signing themselves up, signing their dog up and whatnot in order to vote in the race. We did get a statement from a Liberal Party spokesperson, Parker Lund, today saying, listen, you may think this is very funny, but of course you can't actually vote unless you're a registered Liberal. You're not supposed to be the member of another party. And hey, by the way, there can be a fine of up to $10,000 if you're caught mucking around with all of this. So, you know, we want to watch that space, see how the Liberal Party manages that, but important to note that there are consequences. And I think the other big thing that is playing out today is the question of endorsements. Mark Carney still got a lot of momentum. 24 Liberal cabinet ministers who have endorsed Mark Carney, and I believe you got another one coming up in a minute, compared to 5 for Chrystia Freeland. Some big names coming out for Carney over the weekend. And even today, Marcy Ian, Joanne Thompson, a new member of cabinet, Anita Anand, Bill Blair, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, François-Philippe Champagne.
Yeah, he's got the majority of caucus cabinet, probably the front runner in this race, but someone who's not going to be in the race is Chandra Arya. You mentioned not approved. We don't know why, just that he has been disqualified, and we heard this from him.
Yes, indeed. And he said he is carefully considering, this was in a formal statement, carefully considering my next steps. This decision raises significant questions about the legitimacy of the leadership race and, by extension, the legitimacy of the next Prime Minister of Canada. Chandra Arya is not happy, but of course the big question, as you say, David, comes down to why. Now, the Liberal Party thus far has only said, not getting into specifics, but they invoked the part of the Liberal Party rules that say someone can be rejected either because they don't meet mandatory criteria or because a prospective candidate is manifestly unfit for the office of leader of the party. We know there's a lot going on with Chandra Arya. You had a real blockbuster interview with him on this show, right? He's offside with the party on issues like official bilingualism. He wants to abolish the monarchy, raise the retirement age. There was also that visit to Narendra Modi last summer at a time when Canada-India relations were quite tense because, of course, the Canadian government had accused the Indian government of being involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen. Today, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly was asked about Chandra Arya not being in the race, and here's what she had to say.
For me, as a Francophone, I thought that what he was saying regarding Francophones across the country was unacceptable. And I expect the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada to be fully bilingual because we are in a bilingual country. We're the party of official bilingualism, and it is at the core of our DNA.
Now, I will say that's Melanie Joly's take. That is not the official reason. I mean, we could find out, David, that he didn't have all the 300 signatures that he needed. But I think there are questions continuing to be asked around this. Just what happened. We've asked Chandra Arya, of course, for a bit more information because he would have gotten some of that information from the Liberal Party. Still waiting for an answer. Yeah,
there's a lot of ideas he's put out there that's very offside with this government. But he is a 3-term Liberal MP in good standing in the caucus. So still a lot of unanswered questions there. Catherine, thanks so much. That's the CBC's Catherine Cullen.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at where the caucus endorsements stand. Mark Carney remains far ahead with his fellow MPs, not with his fellow MPs, with Liberal MPs, with 56 supporters. Chrystia Freeland has 26, and Karina Gould has 2. I'm joined now by the latest cabinet minister to endorse Mark Carney, and that is Marc Miller. He is the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. I was breaking news there, calling Mark Carney a member of Parliament, which is not true, but maybe he will be someday.
It'll come.
Why are you endorsing Mark Carney? Why are you getting on board this particular campaign?
Look, I think he's the right man for the job. We could go through his resume. We don't have to. His CV is probably unequaled in terms of its quality in Canada. What he's done on the world stage is well known. What he's able to do for Canada is well known. But for me, I was joking, he's a goalie like me, but it's about the intangibles. He gives us a shot at beating Pierre Poilievre. I think that's important, given the toxic rhetoric coming out of Pierre's mouth on a daily basis. But it's about issues that I cared about, David. Obviously, the economy. I don't think we have to be dogmatic to what we've done for the last 9 years. We have to be able to look at some fresh air coming in and some new ideas, but also matters that matter to Canada and to me, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, right. The environment. Those are things that I think are very important for our party, are very important for Canadians and the next generation. So we had some good talks and chats together. I wanted to understand that he's a regular guy. You can have a chat with him, someone of that quality. You sometimes have difficulty talking to him or having a real conversation. You can have a real conversation with the guy. So that gave me confidence, and it did take, obviously with the Prime Minister leaving, it took some time and some reflection to think about where I would put my support, and it's with Mark Carney.
You say you don't have to be dogmatic to what you've done over the last 9 years. There's a lot of that going around in this race. Chrystia Freeland on consumer carbon pricing, on the capital gains increases and changes that you put in the last budget. Stephen Guilbeault on consumer carbon pricing. Charitably, you could say the Liberals are listening and responding to Canadians. Cynically, it looks like an effort to save the furniture. I mean, how do you think Canadians should view this sudden willingness to abandon policy of the last 9 years?
Well, I think listening to Canadians, David, it's undeniable that we've had to change things up. It's not about compromising our principles, but looking at new ideas and looking what the impact of the last 9 years has had on the economy, and not necessarily doubling down on measures that, while we thought they were important, are ones that need some revision. And I think new ideas brought in by a guy from the outside like Mark Carney are important. We may not necessarily agree. We've had disagreements among cabinet ministers within government about different policies, measures. We've kept it respectful. That's what I want to see. And what I saw in Mark Carney when I sat down with him is not a guy who talked at me or down to me. We had real conversations about the economy, about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, about the environment. Those are all matters that he is open to and willing to take ideas on. In my current portfolio on immigration, he's very much behind some of the important measures that I had to take, difficult ones over the last year, so that did sway things as well.
What are some other policies that you think the Liberals might have to compromise on, that you think, if Mr. Carney, should he win, might chart a new path for your party?
I don't think it's as much about compromising, David, than it is about being flexible and being able to work as a team and see what's working and see what isn't working. I've taken over portfolios where we have had to make some difficult choices, and it's ones where, luckily my fellow colleagues were able to discuss those with me and be flexible about things. On others, it is arguable that we have at times doubled down on matters where perhaps we needed to be a little open-minded. Within any party that happens, it's understandable. But this is something I saw in Mark, and I saw some willingness to have a discussion about things and even change his mind if he thought the arguments were persuasive.
He seems to have the majority caucus, majority of cabinet, even though Chrystia Freeland was the Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. And she has, in multiple interviews now, suggested that the Liberal establishment and the Prime Minister's office are lining up behind Mark Carney. I know you're a longtime friend of Justin Trudeau's. I mean, what do you say to these allegations coming from Chrystia Freeland that the PMO and the party elite are driving this?
Well, I think we need to rally a majority of Canadians. Anyone that's in Parliament, whether they're with the Liberal Party or any other party, for an outsider is seen as the establishment. I won't talk about any of that silliness. We can't be fractious as a party. We need to come out united as a party. we need to get a majority of Canadians and not a majority of caucus for the next election, and that, I think, is the focus. If we go into the next election or come out of this leadership race not unified or as fractious as we went into it, it's not going to bode well in the next election, and Canadians will see that. So I need to see a positive message from all candidates. I've heard that from Mark. And I want to hear a debate of ideas, and I'm putting my weight behind Mark Carney. I'm putting my organizational teams behind Mark Carney. I think when it comes to choices, you have to make a choice in politics, and for me, it's Mark.
You said he gives you the best chance to beat Pierre Poilievre. If you look at the data today, I mean, he does fare better than Chrystia Freeland in some polls, but it's still a wide gap. That looks like a Prime Minister Poilievre at the end of it with a big Conservative majority. So what is it that he can do, in your view, in the time you have until Election Day to change that?
Well, elections matter, and I think you claw away a percentage every week at an election, and it's a horse race. Certainly, we can't take the Conservatives for granted. I see Mark in complete contrast to a guy like Pierre Poilievre. If you compare what Pierre Poilievre has never even put through a piece of legislation through Parliament, and Mark Carney has a resume that speaks for itself. I think that makes them scared. I take more comfort in seeing what Mark is bringing to the table and to our party and to help build it. Certainly this is his first foray into elected politics, so he'll be challenged on a lot of fronts, but I think he's certainly up to it.
Do you worry about that, though, never having run for anything and wanting to immediately come in? Like, Prime Minister's not an entry-level job, and that's where he's going to start, right? So are you worried about his ability to run a campaign, having never done anything like that before?
Look, he has several decades of experience in the private sector. That's something the alternative, Pierre Poilievre, hasn't done for even 1 year. It is difficult to be in politics. Some people do struggle in it, and we've seen examples in the past. But I see all the skill set there, particularly in a guy that's willing to learn, at least through the conversations that I've had. And, speaking from experience, never underestimate a goalie.
Okay, look, you say elections matter. That's certainly the case in the United States. We're seeing the deportations start, right? The threats of tariffs with Colombia from Donald Trump. If you don't take them, we're going to have a trade war. What are you seeing? What are your officials telling you in terms of like what they're hearing in terms of movements towards the Canadian border? Has that started? And what steps are you taking since this is now an active thing in the U.S.?
Well, our conversations are continuing with our U.S. counterparts. A lot of them are private. If they want Canada to work with them on any shared North American hemisphere that they want to protect, they're going to need our cooperation. So things have to be organized at the northern border, our southern border, as they have been with a border where you see 400,000 people cross a day, with billions of goods that cross a day. But we take those threats seriously. Mr. Trump has proven to be unpredictable. I don't think we should be surprised by any sort of the surprises that he springs on us. But we'll be ready, and I think, just watch us. We are a country that does punch above his weight, and we won't be bullied or pushed around. I see the measures that are being taken by the Trump administration. They will certainly continue. I think 4 years of this is something that we need to get ready. We need to dig in, make sure we're prepared for everything. In terms of the tariffs and our countermeasures, we have a whole suite of measures that we're ready to deploy if and when Mr. Trump imposes them.
Right.
When it comes to immigration, Canada needs to continue to be fair and firm, but not cruel. We have principles that we will adhere to, but it doesn't mean that we can't take measures that can coordinate some of the work that we're doing with the Americans currently, whether it's information sharing, whether it is work that we've done with the previous administration to resettle people fleeing war and oppression. That offer will continue with the Americans, and we don't want them sending people in an irregular fashion to our border, just as they don't want to see us sending people to their border. So we have to work together if this is going to work in any sort of coordinated way.
But just as a final point, Minister, Colombia and what happened there with the planes and everything is a dramatic example of it. But you see reports that farm workers who are undocumented just not showing up, to work on the farms because they know they could be rounded up and they're disappearing and moving. They're unlikely to head to the southern border. I mean, do you have any sense of whether there are people in greater numbers making their way here since these actions have started? We've
seen an increased interest, David, in Canada, not in the numbers that we saw under the first Trump administration, but I think we'd be naive to think that this won't occur. The more restrictions the U.S. starts to put in, fair or unfair in the U.S., the more attractive Canada becomes. we are sort of number 1 and 2 countries for people looking to move for whatever reason to in America or Europe. It's difficult geographically to get to Canada.
But on the irregular movement
But
side,
on the irregular movement, we haven't seen anything material right now. But again, we'd be naive to think that this won't happen, as people take their lives into their own hands and decide that maybe Canada is more attractive to them. But again, if you're an irregular person moving up to Canada, first it's cold, it's dangerous to do that, and people will be returned.
Immigration Minister Marc Miller, appreciate the time. Thanks for being here today. We're going to bring in the power panel to talk about all of this. Rob Russo is the former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, now Canada correspondent for The Economist. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Brad Levine is a former National Campaign Director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all. Vandana, the endorsements, look, they're one thing. It's membership. We don't know the final number. Hundreds of thousands may have signed up. Millions, who knows how successful it's been. But what do you make of where things stand based on Mark Carney's way ahead with MPs and cabinet ministers?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly like the caucus choice of most caucus, but it's really up to the memberships. I think it's giving him a good head start. People are talking about him. They're seeing him in a different light, but I think there's still a long way to go. I think, what I've seen is that vote blocks are important. Karina Gould's doing well with young people. I find her that she's doing a lot of like unique media. She's doing podcasts. She's doing other type of engaging with influencers. So all those matter. I even saw Frank Baylis doing a lot of some things with an organization called Operation Black Vote and traveling across the country. And, people do react to them. So it's going to be up to the memberships at the end of the day. So as much as it looks like a 2-horse race between Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, there's still a lot of steps to go. So,
Right. So, Lisa, how do you see it from the outside and the other side when you look at the way this race seems to be a lot of big names lining up behind Mark Carney?
Yeah, I'm going to start first with the race itself. We're 41 days away from knowing who the next Liberal leader is. Those are 41 crucial days for Canada's economy. So I have to start by saying once again, what terrible timing to be going through this, in that we don't have, I believe, a strong leader who is helping us guide through negotiations that are needed with the United States. But the second part of your question, David, with respect to how I see it playing out, I do find it quite ironic that Mark Carney is portraying himself as an outsider, yet he's got most of the votes of the inside cabinet. And then Chrystia Freeland is running on the anti-establishment platform, yet she was the establishment for the past 12 years. So if these are the things that they're testing out within their own ranks for the Canadian public, I think that they should reconsider what their narratives are going to be, because they're really not going to fly.
Brad, how do you see it?
Well, yeah, to Lisa's point, does anybody believe that either the front runners, Mark Carney or Chrystia Freeland, are outsiders or anti-establishment or not the Ottawa elite? I mean, you had Chrystia Freeland out there not only today on The Current, she was on the House on Saturday, clearly trying to position herself, that she's an outsider when she's been the Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister for the last number of years, with her fingerprints on everything of the Trudeau legacy that is so unpopular. It's like 1984 a few times, not only in what we're hearing from the frontrunners, but also on Daniel LeBlanc's reporting on the Senate. It's 1984 in a couple of different reasons. But the big challenge, so the sign-ups were obviously the biggest thing. What we'll look for in the coming days, and Lisa's point is we got 40 more days of this. We have 5 or 6 more Monday power panels to talk about this. So hopefully Carney will put some policy, now that he's got the sign-ups done and the memberships for who is eligible to vote done. Now we got to take a look at some of the policies and where they differentiate. But I do believe that right now, well, yes, it's the grassroots that vote, but I think that caucus, it's an indication of who these Liberal MPs, being multiple points behind the Conservatives at this time, feel that they have a better chance of winning re-election for those that are running again. And I think that that's a bellwether as to what folks across the country think is at least their best chance to save their seat. Maybe not win the next government, but at least save their seat. So I think that's a bellwether for Carney and a tremendous benefit for having the organizers in place across this country.
And Rob, before we get your take on it, we should just clarify for the audience at home. Brad's talking about 1984 when when Pierre Trudeau stepped down for John Turner and took on Brian Mulroney, not the Orwell novel. Go ahead, Rob, because when people cite 1984,
both,
they're often talking
both.
about. Yeah,
I think it's both.
You can do that next round. Rob, your thoughts on where things are.
I'm afraid there's more of evidence of Big Brother now than there was 40 years ago in 1984. Look, I think we've got the wrong frame of reference on this. The way Liberals are looking at this, they're not looking at insiders and outsiders. They're looking at, I think the polite way would be, to put it, would be renewal. The impolite would be survival. Who is going to give them the best chance to win in what was shaping up to be a change election? And I think when you ask MPs, when you ask cabinet ministers why they're going in greater numbers to Mr. Carney, it's because they believe that he best represents renewal. They believe that Ms. Freeland is a known commodity, whether they like her or not. Mr. Carney is not. He is rough around the edges. He's not a great communicator, but they believe he has the most upside in terms of growth potential. He just doesn't have a lot of time to demonstrate that. So to Brad's point, I think what's been interesting to see the way Ms. Freeland has led her campaign, she's gone to a traditional over-the-air campaign. Mm-hmm. She knows she's behind in terms of MPs and in terms of cabinet ministers. So she has been all over the airwaves, and she has been flooding the airwaves with policy. I watched her last night on Tout le monde en parle. I watched her on TVA over the weekend, and she has been strutting her stuff in French as well. It's been interesting to watch that. I think this is the week that Mr. Carney has to emerge and begin to peddle some policy. Mm-hmm. I think that we have to find out very, very soon when and if the Liberal Party Leadership Committee is going to authorize debates and whether one will be in French and one will be in English. I'm watching for that. But there are some critical questions. Number one, of course, is the Trump tariffs. The other one is pipelines, the carbon tax. We could go on and on. Defense spending still has to be clarified by a lot of these candidates. Right. So there's some critical issues and very, very little time.
But, Vandana, I know technically Mark Carney is an outsider to caucus, but, outsiders don't get the prime minister to take their calls and maybe have discussions about cabinet posts when they're not elected, right? So I don't know how that flies. Just like Chrystia Freeland saying she's not the establishment candidate here. Like she says the PMO is lining up behind Carney against her. The PMO says they're neutral. How is this playing internally inside the Liberals? How are they viewing all of this?
It's not. It's playing, like people are thinking it's silly. Like I don't think, to someone's point, people don't care if you're inside or outside. Are you electable? That's all that matters right now. Can we sell you across the country? That's all that matters right now. Can you connect with Canadians? That's what matters right now. And I think what they're seeing with that is they're actually seeing two types of personalities come forward. So I think with the talking about the establishment, anti-PMO, and I've said this before, but people, as much as they wanted the PM to leave, I don't think Liberal members want him and want dirty laundry aired out that way. It doesn't seem as something appreciated to slag like the PMO. There's people who work there that people still respect and enjoy their time and company. It doesn't look good. It comes off as a negative politics and negative campaigning versus someone who's not really addressing that, right? So I don't think from the insider, outsider, I don't hear Liberals saying, I want an insider, outsider. They're like, I want someone who's electable. I want someone who's going to win against Pierre Poilievre. And I also want someone who's going to unite the party and take us to next election. So I think the problem is, and I remember talking to Navdeep Bains about this, but afterwards, how do you connect with people? So if you're mudslinging a lot in between, and then in 2 weeks you have to be ready for an election because you come back, do a speech from the throne, and assuming you're falling at that point.
If you even go back to Parliament,
exactly.
right? Who knows what the new leader may do, right?
But then, how do you unite everyone together? So every Liberal who signs up, even if they don't have their leader of choice, who is the leader? How do you get all of them to be like, we need everyone rowing the same way. We need everyone united together in the fight just against Pierre Poilievre when you've been slinging mud, right? And that becomes harder. So
Lisa, look, you and your party, you've been through a few leaderships over the past decade. When it does get like this, right, when there's allegations of meddling and infighting, and I'm not saying this necessarily happened in the Conservative races, but you do see there are whisper campaigns in every contest. What does that do internally to a party? Like, what's the risk here for the Liberals? Because they're in a tough spot, and if it turns really bitter, it could be even tougher.
I've always found it fascinating that divisions that happen within a party during leadership events actually take hold and stay within the caucus for a long period of time. Whether or not you can paper over them and gloss over them, when there's a moment when the caucus becomes a little bit shaken, those fissures will appear again. But that's well in the future for the Conservatives because they're very content with the direction that they've gone in.
Yeah, but like in terms of like, no, I think they're very united behind Mr. Poilievre and his big lead. But the Liberals, they don't have time to heal, right? Because they're going to come out of this and go right into the election. So I mean, how should they tread in these difficult times not to have big cracks inside what solidarity they have right now?
I hear you. I mean, one of the areas in which we used to get policy, one of the areas that we used to get fissures was around policy. Like this whole discussion is devoid of policy at the moment. I don't know what the cabinet ministers are looking at when they say Mark Carney's our guy, because he hasn't come out with any policy at all. He's come out with a slick commercial. He's talked about building, pretty middle of the road pablum-y kind of stuff. Chrystia Freeland's got a few things that she's come out with, but people are making really big decisions very early on. And maybe Vanden is right. It's all about the sizzle and not about the steak. So if you're not going to have policy disagreements within the party, it may be a little bit easier for them to get along at the end of the day. Look, Liberals are always different from Conservatives when it comes to stuff like this.
Maybe this is at least a really good steak.
Yeah, well,
what I'm saying.
I don't know if you say, I take the point. Electability is what matters. But so look, I just do want to show a couple of things about Mark Carney, because in this race to become the next Prime Minister, there's so much focus on him, and that includes from his main rival for the top job, Chrystia Freeland.
It is certainly looking like Mark is the choice of the Liberal establishment. It is certainly looking like he is the PMO's candidate. And
The PMO's candidate. Can you explain that?
And that is okay with me.
Can you explain that?
I am really happy to be running against the Ottawa establishment.
Okay, and if it isn't Chrystia Freeland going after the Carney campaign, it's the Conservatives.
Carbon tax Carney is having a carbon tax cocktail hours, a canapé carbon tax Carney cocktail hour, if you will, instead of answering questions.
Mark Carney, of course, has been in hiding since he announced his candidacy on American television. He hasn't been seen since his own campaign launch. He hasn't answered a single question.
Okay, Brad, look, I always like it when politicians stand up for the right of reporters to get interviews with politicians. You know, it would be good to have some of that. But what do you make of this, that the Conservatives are following Carney around to his events and doing these counter-programming events? I don't know if they're doing that with Chrystia Freeland. What does that tell us about where things are?
Well, one big sign that this would lead, I think the obvious answer is that they think that he is the choice that's going to win. So you go after the front runner, you don't go after the person that you think is going to come in third. You're wasting your time. So clearly they've got, and they have for quite a long time. They've I think for months now they've been going after Carney just in case he catches on among Liberal grassroots. So that is the case. You saw, Conservative MPs out at his events this past weekend trying to draw him out. So it's a clear indication that they think he's the front runner. Now, whether or not that's effective or not, that actually may bolster internally the Carney campaign to say Melissa Lantsman is coming to East Beaches, East York here in the East End of Toronto. She's not doing that because she's got nothing else to do. She's doing that because the Conservatives see Carney as competition.
Do they see him as inevitable, Brad, or do they see him as a threat? Like, how far do you read into it, I wonder?
Well, I would read that he is the front runner, and that if he wins, he's got the greatest chance of. I mean, it's classic opposition on front runner of your competitor. You're gonna want to make sure that people see when Carney goes quiet. Like, so he did the American show. He did an event in Toronto this past weekend. He hasn't been doing the circuit like Chrystia Freeland has. So what the Conservatives are attempting to do is to brand Carney a certain way so that when he does come out, he'll have inevitable questions that the media will say, well, here's what the Conservatives are saying about you. Right. So they're trying to label him. They're trying to brand him. The vacuum that he's creating, whether it's smart or not, I'll leave that to the Carney people to defend. But in the absence of him coming out and saying, here's where I stand on issue X or issue Y, Landsman will fill in the gap quite. And this is the fundamental mistake. That if you want to go back and talk about the politics where Trudeau made one of his greatest blunders, it was not spending a penny of Liberal Party of Canada dollars. When Poilievre became leader of the Conservatives, they let him free, and so he was able to define himself. Yeah. Whereas that was one of the greatest weaknesses. Is Carney making the same mistake? The answer lies in when he does come out and starts putting some. Not he doesn't have to come out with the red book. He just has to come out with where do I stand on key issues? What is my priorities if I were to become Prime Minister? Fill in the vacuum. Otherwise, the Conservatives will do it for you.
Yeah, Rob, you are seeing some criticism of Mr. Poilievre in Mark Carney's videos, saying he's a career politician. He's never fixed a thing. He just complains, and we'll see if they sustain that and put some money behind it. But that gives us an idea of where Carney is going with it. What do you make of the fact that he's being targeted so quickly by the front-runner Conservatives?
A couple of things. I think everybody is getting to the same point. Your offense tells you about your defense. And what does this tell us about the defense? Tactically, two things I saw over the last 2 or 3 days that I think were noteworthy. Both Ms. Rempel and
Melissa Landsman?
Please remind me. Melissa. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Melissa Landsman. Yeah, both of them were trying to go back to the carbon tax theme. And they are trying to make sure that this remains a change election by doing that. That's the theme that they want the election to be run on. Mr. Poilievre himself changed tactics as well, I thought, over the last couple of days. He did an interview with a member of the mainstream media, one of our colleagues at CTV. He put some real flesh on the bones of what he would do in the face of the Trump tariffs. That's also an acknowledgement that the ballot box question might be shifting. So we saw a higher profile, Mr. Poilievre, with the mainstream media on an issue that is becoming more and more the issue, particularly given the February 1st deadline that might looming, as well as an attempt to make this a change election.
Yeah, he did say on the Trump thing that he favored the idea of dollar for dollar, but then he also said you need to keep it targeted and focus on things that won't hurt. At least I see you there in a sec. But so those are a little bit contradictory.
Also tax cuts in the face of those things.
But how do you do dollar for dollar, but keep it limited in what you hit to make it surgical to limit the mitigation? Because you can't get the dollar for dollar if you do that. And then how do you cut taxes if you're facing a 25% tariff? Like the what, but the how is still missing from that. Lisa, your thoughts on that?
I was going to say that you're going to see more and more of MPs traveling around and going to these events of the Liberal leader candidates, mainly because the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament. What else are they going to do? Right? I mean,
yes, they're free.
So on this one, what a dumb move. You want to keep them in the House so they're not out bothering you. They wouldn't be there if the House were sitting right now.
Well, at least if you kept them in the House, there'd be a non-confidence vote and we'd be in the middle of an election. So, pick your poison there, I guess, if you're the Liberals, right? But, Vonda, it's interesting. Like Mark Miller was on the show earlier. He says, in his view, Mark Carney gives you the best chance to beat Pierre Poilievre, to win the next election. There's been a string of polls, and we're kind of waiting to see, a bunch. You've got Ecos saying it's down to a single-digit lead now. Main Street still has the Conservatives out front, but suggests you're ahead of the Conservatives in Ontario. David Coletto at Abacus still has a shift from being down 27 to being down 18, which is a move. But Angus Reid has numbers today that Mark Carney is like at 29% to Pierre Poilievre's 43, Chrystia Freeland's 24 to 44. None of them show a consensus, but they show movement. They show some volatility. I mean, what do you take from that?
I mean, there's going to be volatility, and anytime there's a federal leadership or any leadership campaign, there is juice. I even saw it in third party when excuse me, when Notley won, it gave a dip, like a rise in the NDP numbers. Like, that is going to happen. Yep. I say that just to my fellow Liberals to keep calm and carry on. Don't get too excited. It's still a long time before Election Day, and Liberals still need to do the grassroots work and re-earn trust of Canadians and build that trust authentically. And there's still a lot more steps to get there. So I think it's just common in this time, I think, with Ontario, given the election coming, but also federal leadership also just adds more energy and more excitement. Right. People are talking about it. Every time I go to the office, people are asking about it. You hear it all over media. So people, it gets people excited. And I think, that is sadly with the PM, when he stepped aside, it gave that option. So I think while it's, as a Liberal, it is promising numbers. I will say that it is still a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I always say the most important poll is actually on election day.
No, of course. Of course. And just for people who've been sending me emails saying, why aren't you doing stories in these polls? We want to see a series of polls to see what's an outlier, what's not out, see if there's a trend line. You don't want to jump at any one thing and get on that polar coaster. But Brad, it still looks like a pretty commanding and safe Conservative lead at this point in time, but some movement. Who knows how much more it could move, because with Trump, things move fast. What do you see as sort of the volatility and the fluidity right now in the electorate?
What their ballot question will be, and it will probably change over the course of the coming weeks, because if you asked the Conservatives a couple of months ago, they would have said this will be a referendum on Trudeau and a referendum on the carbon tax. That is at least one or both of those are no longer going to be the thing. As much as the Conservatives would like to make it about Trudeau and the carbon tax, at least they have to pull that back in. It wasn't as evident as it was maybe if this election were in the fall. So a lot of the Trump noise is going to have a big impact. This guy's, you want to talk about what the volatility is. This guy is volatility embodied here. Like you got to watch every single CBC News channel show to figure out what's the latest. So there's going to be lots of churn. So the ballot question for these challengers like Carney and Freeland, they want to make it about the Trump tariffs, not about Trudeau's legacy or about the carbon tax. And whether or not people see that Carney or Freeland would be better on Trump's tariffs versus Poilievre, will be to the obviously that's not what Poilievre wants. So we'll see what other things he comes up with. It could be about national unity. It could be about national sovereignty. It could be a whole bunch of these things that will flow from the tariff. The tariffs being the key signal here, but then there's going to be a whole bunch of flow. Who will stand up for Canada? Who will speak for Canada? All of these things are likely the outflow of the response to the Trump tariffs and the Trump administration overall.
Yeah, so Rob, I don't know if it's going to be a carbon tax election, because I don't think anyone's going to be running on the carbon tax except the Greens. And but affordability and people not being happy with where they are in life will still very much be factors in this election. Brad referenced 84. Is there a comparison here to 88, where the relationship with the United States can become the dominant thing and become the thing that just moves where the conversation is? Because it seems like the whole issue set is just going to shift dramatically before this even Liberal race is over, never mind the election.
Yeah, you tell me where we're going to be on voting day in terms of tariffs, and you show me whose name is going to be on that ballot for the Liberal Party, because these polls have no name attached to the leader of the Liberal Party. And I think I put more credence in the polls.
Yeah.
I mean,
Angus Reid did have names, just by the way, just to let you know. They did compare Poilievre versus Freeland and versus Carney, and Carney is about 5 points to the good.
So most of the movement that I saw in the polls that you mentioned earlier were in Ontario. And what's happened in the last few days in Ontario? Premier Ford has decided that he's going to go early to the people. And I think that might have something to do with it, until we see a series of polls on issues that people are going to vote on. I think I'm going to stick to my position that polls at this stage of the game without a leader's name on it are really for incontinent canines.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Maybe wouldn't use such colorful prose, but But Lisa, there is just so much change and instability. It's hard to really know where opinion is going to firm right now, right? Because there's so many unknowns at this point in time.
I agree, and I agree with what Rob just said, but I'd also say that my sense is this election is, whatever it's going to be about, the thesis of the Conservatives or the thesis of the opposition, whoever it's going to be, should be the reason why we're here today in the mess that we're in is because of this Liberal government for the past 10 years. So no matter what the issue is, that's going to come out as the one thing Canadians are going to go to the ballot box to voice their concern about. It's all going to be predicated upon, we have a bad situation, you don't like the way it is, and it's because these guys have been in government, and a vote against them is the path forward.
Well, Vandana, that seems to be, if this becomes a national Canadian election entirely about issues within Canada's borders, bad for you, good for Mr. Poilievre. If it becomes about the global situation and how to deal with the president, an opportunity there for the Liberals? Is that how you would assess it?
Yeah, I think either way, both issues will be on the table in some
Of course, yeah.
I think people will clue into the U.S. because that's the most pressing thing right now, and that does bleed into affordability. You know, whatever happens with tariffs is going to affect everyday Canadians, and it's going to hurt Canadians and Americans. So I think that does present an opportunity, but I think also just change. I do think that given the Conservatives' numbers, like I don't think that was for Mr. Poilievre. I think that was a I want change. And someone saying, and he was addressing the issues. He was addressing affordability.
Yep.
But I do think people want a positive outlook overall. So I think that's the opportunity for the Liberals, actually. If there is a positive campaign, that there is a change happening, then that's going to be important. But also, that's when I think actually policy plays in. I think in the leadership campaign, you're talking just to Liberals. Your goal is to just talk to them and persuade them to vote for you. I think soon you'll see that change into like the broader voters. And that's when they'll see, like, can these policies help me? Will they help us get through this hard time? And who's best to give Canadians the best shot they need?
Okay, we got to leave it there, but as Brad said, there's like 4 or 5 more of these before we even know who's going to win this thing. So lots more to top, and it's going to change.